The honourable member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to speak on behalf of my constituents from Surrey North. I'm speaking today about Bill S-7, the proposal to reintroduce anti-terrorism measures which were previously sunsetted in the Anti-Terrorism Act. Bill S-7 has been shamefully promoted in the wake of the Boston Marathon bombings. The government is exploiting public fear in order to push through their agenda. It is appalling to attempt to use the mourning and pain of American people to push through legislation that is blatantly confiscating our human rights and civil liberties. Bill S-7 is not about preventing terrorism. We already have a comprehensive justice system and enough legislation to protect Canadians from acts of terrorism, as well as a variety of capable institutions to facilitate these laws. Rather, this bill fundamentally attacks our rights and freedoms. Mr. Speaker, Bill S-7 is a reintroduction of the sunsetted clauses of the Anti-Terrorism Act, which were also designed in the wake of instrumental and horrifying event, the terrorist acts of September 11, 2001. The clauses introduced in the Anti-Terrorism Act were given a sunset period, which has expired at this point. These clauses include the allowance of investigative hearings and preventative detention, as well as the permission for judges to publicly disclose information about a trial or the persons being tried. Even at first glance, it is obvious that there are major violations of human rights and civil liberties at stake. The term human rights is often tossed around vaguely as an abstract concept. However, the key to this discussion is in exploring what human rights are. The codification of human rights emerged during the 18th century with the French Declaration of Rights of Man and American Declaration of Independence. These documents were designed to limit what state could do to its citizens. Human rights essentially prescribe what liberties a citizen has within his or her own state and the duties that the state has to its citizens. States have an obligation to respect, protect, fulfill the rights, human rights of their citizens. This is not a duty that our government should be taking lightly. We have made international commitments that confirm our dedication to protecting our citizens from human rights violations. In 1976, Canada ratified the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Under this human rights treaty, the government has obligation to protect the liberty of people within its borders. This explicitly means nobody should be subject to arbitrary arrest or detention. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, in this discussion of in the discussions at the Public Safety Committee, it was discovered that the wording of Bill S-7 allowed for the arrest of people who are not suspected of terrorist activities. In further consultations with parliamentary secretaries, it was confirmed that this was the intention of the government. It is this government's intention to expose every single Canadian to this preventive detention, not only those who could potentially cause acts of terrorism. Mr. Speaker, imagine that the resources and cost of arresting and detaining anybody, regardless if there is any cause to believe they may engage in criminal activity. The original purpose of the Anti-Terrorism Act was to update Canadian legislation in order to respond to the United Nations Security Council standards. We must consider that Canada must also adhere to international standard of human rights. Of course, terrorism itself has a direct impact on human rights that the Canadians enjoy. It especially violates the principle of life, liberty, and security of a person. Mr. Speaker, media rhetoric describes terrorism as opposite of freedom, although they are not simply binary concepts. If freedom and terrorism are somewhat polarized, then how can we describe the limitations on freedom that this government is proposing? In the preamble to the UN ICCPR, it is stated, the ideal of free human beings enjoying civil and political freedom and freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created whereby everyone may enjoy human rights. Does Bill S-7 propose conditions where everyone can enjoy their human rights? It seems to be the opposite case, Mr. Speaker. This government is exploiting fear to confiscate our freedoms and rights. You know, nobody in this House is debating that terrorism shouldn't be addressed. Terrorism is a horrific problem that attacks the heart of national pride and undermines state stability. The events at Boston Marathon last week were horrific, and I stand by my colleagues as we condemn these attacks and offer our deepest sympathies and the best wishes to the victims and families. Bill S-7 presents us with a very contentious issue. There's a delicate balance between national security and individual human rights. However, this is a balance that Canada has already found. Our criminal code already offers necessary provisions for investigating those who are involved in terrorist activities and those who could be a potential terrorist threat to national safety. Mr. Speaker, the proposed clauses have been proven unnecessary, ineffective in the past. They have only been evoked once in a situation described as a, and I quote this, complete and sad fiasco by lawyers and human rights advocates alike. Rather than investing in procedures that create fiascos, this government should be investing in our institutions that have proven themselves capable, like the RCMP. Just yesterday, RCMP announced that they have stopped a plan of terrorism within our borders. There's 2 suspects in custody right now, Mr. Speaker. The RCMP were able to handle the situation without the aid of the causes in this bill, S-7. They were effective, timely, and able to perform their jobs without compromising human rights of Canadians. We are thankful for the work of the RCMP, and we need to recognize that work. We should be investing in supporting these institutions that are able to work effectively within the current sphere of the Canadian justice system. Mr. Speaker, there are valuable tools that should have been introduced into Anti-Terrorism Act, which would have been influential towards combating terrorism while upholding the integrity of Canadian values of liberty and rights. We should be promoting interagency cooperation to reflect the multifaceted nature of terrorism.
Have a point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I think that we're below quorum, and I think this honourable member deserves more people listening to his speech in the chamber here.
I don't think that's a point of order or anything that the chair can do to encourage more people to come in. There is now quorum in the House. Honourable member can continue.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues, Conservative colleagues, who finally rushed into the House. You know, they often talk about terrorism and how they're going to protect Canadian human rights, you know, invest in our RCMP and other agencies, and yet they're not. They don't want to participate in this debate. That's very sad, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, efforts. There are many valuable tools that should have been introduced into the Anti-Terrorism Act, which would have been influential towards combating terrorism while upholding the integrity of Canadian values of liberty and rights. We should be promoting interagency cooperation to reflect the multifaceted nature of terrorism and address the source of terrorist activities. Efforts against terrorist activities should be performed without discrimination of any kind. The government should be transparent in its dealing with terrorist activities, and we should be able to hold them accountable for their actions. These do not seem like unreasonable respects, yet when they were proposed in committee by the NDP, they were determined beyond the scope of this bill. We cannot sit here and watch the fundamental rights of our citizens be taken away by this government. Even the United Nations, who requested that states align their legislation and with Security Council standards, have established that human rights are integral to combating terrorism, stating, and I quote this, respect for human rights and the rule of law must be the bedrock of a global fight against terrorism, end quote. Mr. Speaker, The government has an obligation to all Canadians, to all Canadians within this borders, to all international community and the international bodies that govern our human rights. The government must respect our current freedoms, protect our rights, as well as our security, and fulfill their obligations to Canadians by investing in effective counter-terrorism strategies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.